Je peux vous dire que je suis un très bon chasseur.
Ha!
Je peux vous dire que je suis un très bon chasseur.
Ha!
Je peux vous dire que je suis un très bon chasseur.
Ha!
Je peux vous dire que je suis un très bon chasseur.
Ha!
All right, Fabiano. So you've done some thinking in terms of the movement, and this all seems really nice and fluid. I know it's rough. You're just trying to get the gesture and movement down, which is fine. You're losing a little bit of the structure. Usually you want your gestures to be close to the structure of the characters, not changing too much. You want it to give you enough there. I guess when you get to the point where you're tying this down, you're going to have a little bit more work to do. It's also hard for me to gauge the quality of the appeal of the animation and the posing, as well as the drawing in some of the cases, just because you're so rough and loose. It's fine to be rough and loose. I would just try to pull it in terms of, solid structure and drawing understanding. But the movement that you're working out here is very thoughtful. It's very fluid. It's nice that you're looking at this and going up into this high, big mouth movement to match the voice, the dialogue track, and you're thinking about squash and stretch. So everything's very fluid. So you got a nice organic feel to the movement that you're putting in here. And this is fun. This nice big stretch to these mice. And I like what you're doing with the mice. They're just standing around talking and not even bothered by the thing, just the cat, and just walking off. And then instead of hitting that other pose that I provided, you're going straight into this pose here, which is fine because you're watching him go off, because he only needs one. So the way you're doing it, this delivers on one, and I think you've got a valid way of doing this. So that's very interesting. The only thing is, getting into this pose seems a little mechanical. I don't really feel him doing anything except doing in-betweens into this pose. And I would try to figure out a way that's a little more interesting and fluid getting there. The one problem here that rings out like a bell is that all the body parts start in movement and stop at the very same time. So that's what's giving it that mechanical feel. There's no breaking of joints, there's no drag, follow through, anticipation, settle in this little section here. So you really have to work on that there. And it looks like there's a little skew there in the drawing. I would say avoid those kinds of things. You don't want to do this mechanically unless you're doing a mechanical, looking for a mechanical sensibility. The eye can find it. Even the most untrained eye knows that something is weird going on here, because everything is moving in the exact same way. Even if there's a gradient on it, it can sense that mechanical nature. So never underestimate the power of an eye to be able to catch things like that. And you want to make sure these poses are interesting. The way you've got it here just feels a little bit awkward. The way you've drawn it, I don't know why. I know it's close to what I gave you, the pose I gave you, but it might be the fact that perhaps I'm not feeling the perspective here. You want a sense of perspective, even though I know you're cheating it. Also, watch points like that. Those are not, they draw attention to themselves, and unnecessarily so smooth that out, potentially. Just trying to figure out a way to make this look interesting. So if you're going to land on a pose, that pose has to be really appealing and really well thought out. Even in a rough stage, you have to have the force, the movement, the rhythm, the posture, the gesture, whatever you want to call it, has to be working very well and communicate just like that. Animator long time ago, when I was learning how to animate, told me Imagine that your scene is being played on a tiny television set all the way across a large room, and your animation has to convey, has to read in that kind of a setting. And that's a good lesson. Even today, even though we have large screen TVs, people aren't doing that. That sense of being and giving an immediate read is very, very useful. So think about that as you're doing your posing. All of you should be doing that. The other thing is, I would always do an appeal, maybe not always, but sometimes I'll do an appeal pass where I'll just make sure all my, like what I'm looking at here, when I animate, I have my preliminary scribble pass that is just for me. And then I'll tie it down a little bit more once I know sort of the rhythm I'm getting into and where I'm going with something. This is closer to my preliminary scribble pass. Of course, I might be a little more scribbly than this at that pass, but you know, for communication's sake and to ensure a director or a supervisor or a producer that your work is going to be solid, you know, take the time to do a pass on your posing that's a little more it's a little more tied down than what you've got here. But overall, I think the movement is nice. You're thinking about some good things. The gestures are nice. I would say you're maybe pushing the smear drawings a little bit too much. Like this here, on these hands, don't have to be smeared. Especially some of them are on twos, I think. Yep, some of them are twos. If something is on twos, there's no dry brush, there's no smearing of the drawings. You only save that for things that are on ones. Yeah, so like here, it might work there, but it feels a little bit too much. So I would pull in. I would say this is just a little bit too much smear. If you want a little bit of smear on that movement, keep it, you know, compressed into this zone, not so long, because you're transversing the basically point A to point B with the smear. So because they're so close, it feels like there's too much drag and then too much stop on the other end of it. And then you immediately go into this one. You're sort of doing the same thing too. Make sure they follow through correctly. Think of it in terms of blur. It's basically a blur, and so if you're going to blur, for example, this drawing to this one, this should be here because his hand is over here that's coming this way, right? See where your hand is? It actually should be over more. So here's the hand. So it's got to be more like this, right? So make sure your blurs or smears are connecting or feeling like they're connecting to where they should go. All right. And just make sure you're not always doing these angled drawings on the cats. Even here, I would curve that rather than, I mean, that's a severe angle there. I would just make that a curve on that. And okay, so that's it. Good job.